Welcome to the Speak by Design podcast, where we study personal style, message structure, and message strategy so you can become a consistently compelling force. Let's dig in. Questions. This is the moment that sets you apart from other speakers, from other leaders. This shows how you think on your feet. And how you think on your feet speaks to how mature, how knowledgeable, how relaxed, how calm you are, how comfortable you are with any question. What if you believed that there was no such thing as a difficult question? Can you even wrap your mind around that? Many people say to me, that's the hardest part of my job, is I'm going to be asked gotcha type questions, off the wall questions, confusing questions, questions that are irrelevant and shouldn't even be brought up, questions that have an angle on them that are trying to make me look bad. Now, all of that belief is negative to you. And negative, not just that it's a downer, negative that it is going to hold you back along the path of becoming a great speaker. So here's the new belief I want you to work on, which is I can handle any question. I enjoy all questions. I want to hear their questions. Now that's a really great one. I want to hear their questions because that's going to make you listen better. That's going to make you make stronger eye contact. That's going to slow you down. That's going to help you want to step closer to your audience, which intensifies your presence. So all of these thoughts and beliefs end up making you behave as a better speaker. Imagine the alternative. If you were to believe they're going to ask me hard questions, you are likely going to freeze. Or you'll speak too fast, or you'll have scattered eye contact. You'll likely distort the question and answer the wrong question. Many things fall apart when we believe that they are going to ask me tough questions. So here's where I see this come up a lot. The board. You're going into a board meeting and you've got a very tight update and recommendation that you're going to give. And then somebody asks an off-the-wall question and you think, I'm not going to be able to handle that. Of course, you're going to be able to handle that. And I'll show you some tactics as well. So right now we're focusing on the mindset, but then we'll cover best practices and some real approaches in the moment that you can take toward those more difficult questions. Forget about yourself for a moment and imagine you're watching a speaker deliver a presentation. It's been very smooth, very clever, very well organized, and you've enjoyed it. And then they finish and you see them give a big, heavy sigh as though they're so delighted to be done with that presentation. And then their posture slumps and you see them smile, and it's a genuine smile. And then you realize the smile they've used before was more of a plastic smile. And then they rush up to the audience and say, what questions do you have? As though they think the presentation is over. I want you instead, when you come to a Q&A portion, that you want to make it look the same as it did in the presentation. It should not feel like a massive shift in style from presentation to Q&A. There should be no difference. One way we coach our speakers is to believe the whole time during the presentation that their intention is to make this feel like a conversation, even though they're speaking continuously for 10 minutes with no interruption. Let's say, sometimes people are speaking longer than that, but 10 minutes, no interruption, but that they believe that they are in a dialogue so that when they get to the Q&A, it is a heightened form of that mental dialogue they've already been having. Another thing that we give our speakers is that their intention is to plant enough seeds of desire and intrigue throughout the presentation that they get a flood of questions. because the more questions you get, the better. Now, you might think, no, I don't have time for those questions. That's a negative belief too, because then you're going to rush through questions, which sometimes is okay if you've got a lot of people you want to hear from and you can give them 30-second, 10-second responses and move on from person to person, almost like a media interview, what we see politicians deal with in the president's office with the media as well. That's fine. But the desire to get people hungry to ask you a question and get them feeling safe enough to ask you a question. Remember, some people don't even feel comfortable speaking up to the speaker because the speaker has been confusing or the speaker has been intimidating. And we want to invite those questions because in answering those questions, we likely help fuel them to take action or make a decision faster. We want to satisfy those questions. We want to understand what was confusing. What we don't need in the Q&A section is for them to like us. We don't need for them to say, "This was a great presentation." If they do, ignore it. Because if you look satisfied with, "Oh, good, you like me," it doesn't look well for the speaker. Focus on the questions. You're there to find out what was confusing and offer more clarity. You're also there to use those questions to increase desire for the change, whatever you're proposing. Here are some audience pet peeves with handling questions. Have you seen a speaker answer the wrong question? The question comes across and they either didn't hear it or don't understand it, or they have mentally imagined a very different question because maybe they want to stay on message and they're answering the wrong question. Or they're answering not just the question, but the question under that question and the question under that question. They're going into so much depth with the question that it's becoming a 5-minute response. And sometimes you see this with speakers who think their audience is not going to ask enough questions and they're worried it's going to be quiet. So they end up over talking with each question to fill the time. Let's say they're 15 minutes for Q&A, where it would have been better to take more questions and answer them concisely. You can always end early, and audiences do not mind that. One of my greatest pet peeves, and it irritates me socially as well as in business, is when somebody asks a yes or no question, but then the person responding tells a story. Have you heard this? It is most deadly when they do this and they're actually there to sell you something. So you ask, "Is this a good product?" And they say, "Let me tell you about one of our customers who's using this." I didn't ask. I just want to know if it's good for me. I wasn't ready for this story. Now, you might have a great story, but because you didn't directly answer my question, I am unsatisfied. I'm impatient. I'm not going to listen as well. I'd listen better if you said something like this. I asked, "Is this product good for X?" And you say, "It is great for X because it does 1 and 2. Would you like to hear about one of our customers who's using it that way?" Because I ask you a question at the end, would you like to hear a story or an example of that? Now I'm getting myself invited to tell the story because the person buying might say, "I really don't have time for that. I only have a couple more minutes and I have a few more questions." Let them be the driver of the conversation. In sales, so often you're trained and armed with all these great case studies and use cases that you want to share and you want to credentialize. But if you haven't been invited, it's really irritating to start offering up what feels like a presentation when the person did not expect that or want it. Okay, so Stephanie, what are the 4 best practices? Because yes, the mindset is important. Yes, watching out for the frequent mistakes people make with questions is important. But if you follow these 4 best practices, you're already ahead of the game of handling questions well. And you are going to want to teach these best practices to your team members. You may even want to memorize them. And they're short. So here they are. Number 1, Confirm you understand the question. Number 2, answer only the question that was asked. Number 3, answer the first sentence as directly as possible. So if it's a yes or no, answer with yes, no, or it depends in the first sentence. If it is a question like, what's your top priority? Make sure the first sentence out of your mouth is a high-level theme or priority with a time-bound area. So my top priority for this quarter is X. Then the fourth best practice is remove the unnecessary language. Now, most of us are going to be aware of the unnecessary actually, basically, really, really, really language. But the other language we want to get rid of is the hedging language. Maybe, might, sort of, kind of, just, and a little bit. A little bit is the phrase I'm hearing all the time where people say, well, let's look at this a little bit closer. Let's do a little bit more here. And here's a bit I want to share. Little and bit, little bit. Let's get rid of little bit. Let's go back to the first one. Confirm you understand the question. So the question comes across, let's imagine it's a senior leader, somebody that is the most powerful decision maker in the room, and they ask a really confusing question or a question that you could not even understand. And that could be because of low volume, pronunciation, poor technology quality. You've got to say something like, can you repeat that? Could you say that again? Like, that has to happen for you to hear the question again. Let's say it comes again and you still don't understand it. You can then say, are you asking about X or Y? Are you asking, and then restate the question. Now, what do we hear a lot of speakers do when they are in Q&A? They'll say, great question, good question. If that sincerely comes out of you because you're being asked a question that you have never thought of before, you can use that genuinely once. If it is happening after every or most of the questions, it sounds like you're rating the question, buying time, and unsure of what you're going to say. In this step 1 of confirming that you understand the question, just restating it back to you or the audience. Let's suppose you've got a big audience and you're the only one with a microphone. Well, then it's actually appropriate for you to repeat the question to the entire audience. You can say something like, Mary just asked, how is this new plan going to affect blank? And by restating the question, it gives you more time to come up with the answer. Now, for these questions, please first assume that they did not hear what you said in the presentation, because a lot of times we have answered the question in the presentation and we assume that that did not satisfy them and they're looking for the additional detail. But instead, I want you to just answer what was already covered in the presentation as it relates to that topic. But don't do something like this, like I said a minute ago, because that makes Mary feel like she's wasn't listening or tuned out, makes her feel bad for asking the question. Instead, answer it very directly using the content you've already shared. This is you staying on message, where you repeat, here's how it's going to affect our plan. We will make these shifts in the coming quarter. And then look at Mary to see if that satisfies her or if she has additional questions beyond that. And she might say, well, that's what I heard you say. My question about that is, and then she could go on. See if you can satisfy the question with a response that takes only 30 seconds. Sometimes all they needed for a board level meeting was a 10-second response. And because they have those board agendas stacked tightly with many different speakers, they want to have as many senior leaders in the company speak as possible. Sometimes it feels like you want to be able to do those 10-second responses. You speaking for 90 seconds is a juicy amount of time. And certainly speaking longer than that for handling questions is too long. You've got to button it up. Now, the second point, the second best practice, which is answering only the question that was asked. This is hard for experts. If you're an expert on the topic you're speaking on, which most people are, that's why you've been asked to speak, you know way too much about the concept. You know about every mistake that's been made. You know about every micro decision along the way in this path. You are going to likely overtalk. When we coach senior leaders and we practice handling questions or media questions, senior leaders will say, "How do you do that? How do you make it so concise and high level?" Well, it's easy for an outside coach to do that because we don't have the knowledge that you have. You have to lift yourself up out of the details. You know, when you listen to a chief operating officer speak versus a chief executive officer, it's a completely different speaking style because the CEO is speaking from a very different point of view, a point of view that's the voice of the entire organization, that is looking into the future and has this big, beautiful, clean, clear vision, where the chief operating officer knows all the details of how we're going to make this happen and knows all of the risks involved and is managing those risks to such a high level that that is what is in their heads when they're handling questions. And so that's what comes out of their mouth. This is why we can learn so much from a chief marketing officer and the way they communicate, because they don't have the level of detail and risk that a financial leader, operations leader, or technical leader has in their head. And it's easier for them to find that higher level. It's easier for them to stay simple, and it's easier for them to listen more closely to the question. So the goal for you is to listen so close to the question that you are able to answer only the question that was asked. If the question is, how confident are you in the analysis? You want to be able to say, very confident because of X and because of Y. And then be quiet. Maybe they have a follow-up question, maybe not. Maybe that suffices everything right there. All right, the third best practice is answer the question directly in that first sentence. So answering the question, we call that top down, which means putting the bottom line up front. If they ask you a question like, who are your competitors? Now that is a question that should be answered directly with, our competitors are Starbucks and McDonald's, something like that. But often people will do this, where they say, we don't really have competitors. We're very unique because our company does X and Y and Z. But the listener is still looking for, certainly you have some competition. This is not a negative question, but many speakers will think that that is a gotcha question. Check your mindset. Competition is good. Competition means we're in a healthy market and we're not the only ones there. If you're the only one there, you have to do a lot of demand creation. And so, but this is true of any question. Many times people are awfulizing the question, like, this is a hard one, this is a bad one, I don't want to answer this one. They're all good questions. See how you can answer it directly with, company ABC and company XYZ are our best competitors. Here's what we admire about them. Do you see how this is a great question for you? It's going to show off how well you know the competitive landscape, how well you can position your company, your idea, as being better and differentiated from the competition. This is one you want to practice. So the last best practice that I want to cover is the hedging language. This is where you can make yourself look shaky, uncertain, confused, overwhelmed, frustrated as well. So when the question comes across, try not to do a long ramp into the response like, well, we've sort of looked at many things here and it's a little bit clunky, and what we might do possibly, if everybody's on board, is we'll consider doing, okay, see that long ramp into the response? That's irritating to the audience, as well as it starts to make the audience wonder, does this person even know what to do? Is this the right leader? Now, this happens most often with big boards. The board member asks a question and you start answering with a long, winding way into the question because you're not sure of the answer. And in doing so, you leave the impression that you are not the right person for the job and that you are not mature enough of a leader to be able to answer questions, that you didn't prepare for the obvious questions that would be asked. And there are very obvious questions boards ask. They're always going to ask you about your confidence level. They're always going to ask you about market forces, competitive landscape, technical acumen. They're going to want to know that you have a great plan. Well, when you don't have the answer, this sounds so much better to say, rather than give you incomplete information, let us get back to you on that. You could even hypothesize and say, we're still looking into that. We hypothesize that that's happening because of X. Let us get back to you. Senior leaders believe that some of the best value they add is by asking you great questions. We want to reward those senior leaders when they ask a good question. And we're not there to make them feel small or less than for their type of question. We want to be delighted that they brought something up. Let's recap this because I want you to try this out immediately before your next meeting. You're going to be asked questions today, and you can be putting into practice these new thoughts. So the first thought is that you love questions, that there's no such thing as a difficult question, and you are looking forward to hearing those questions. So that's mindset. Then there are the 4 best practices. When the question comes across, first ask yourself, do I understand this question? Because that's your opportunity to restate it, reframe it, clarify it any way you need to. Then the second best practice was answer only the question that was asked. If they ask you, how does this work? Share how it works in a 30-second response and see if they want something bigger. And they might be saying how when they really mean why. That's very common. And clarify, do you want to know how it works or why it works? Are you looking for a 30-second response or a 3-minute response? Sometimes when they know it's more time, they will change their question. Third, is answer it top down. Give the high level answer first. If it's a yes or no question, answer yes, no, or it depends up front. And then lastly, remove the hedging language unless you need it. If you need to add a caveat, go ahead and caveat it. But otherwise, we want to take out the maybe, might, sort of, kind of, the long consideration in terms of really, if we think about all those wasted phrases people put into their messages, take them out. And you will sound different fast. Not only will you sound different, you're going to feel so different on the inside when you're following these best practices and believing the best about the questions that come your way. All right, take care, everybody. If you are enjoying all of these lessons, but now you're hungering to turn all of this into skills and habits that make this work intuitive and natural so that you don't have to think about it, then you want to join Speak by Design University. That's our coaching program that gives you private coaching, group coaching with me, group training, self-paced learning, as well as exceptional networking with other people like you. This program is for managers and above, people whose careers are on fire and they're looking to hit their next level and they want to do that sooner rather than later. Check it out at speakbydesign.com/join. That's speakbydesign.com/join, and you can start with us at the 1st of next month. We hope to see you there.